She thought it was just another trial, until she looked into the defendant's eyes and recognized her childhood best friend. What happens next will break your heart and restore your faith in second chances. A judge, a criminal, a forgotten friendship, a hidden truth that could change everything. Watch till the end. You won't believe how this courtroom drama unfolds. The courtroom was packed. The heavy doors creaked open, and the air inside turned thick with tension. The usual rustle of papers and murmurs of lawyers felt oddly hushed today, as if something was about to happen. Something no one expected. Judge Rebecca Allen sat in her chair, high above the room, wearing her black robe and an expression of authority she had mastered over the years. She was known for being fair but firm, strict but compassionate. Her courtroom was a place of order, and she made sure it stayed that way. She glanced down at the docket. The next case was a robbery, armed and violent. Another unfortunate name on a long list of people she had to judge. She sighed and called for the defendant to be brought in. The bailiff opened the side door, and a man in handcuffs walked in, his eyes low, his face blank. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. Just another defendant, just another life gone off track. But then, Judge Allen looked again. Her eyes narrowed. Something about his face. It stirred something deep inside her. A memory, a feeling. Her breath caught for a second, and then it hit her, like lightning. Her gavel froze mid-air. "Marcus?" she whispered. Barely loud enough for anyone to hear, but in her mind it echoed like a thunderclap. She leaned in, staring at him. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time, and she saw it, saw the recognition flash across his face, saw the same disbelief she was feeling. His lips parted slightly. He knew who she was. "Rebecca?" he mouthed, just as stunned as she was. The courtroom stood still. Nobody else in the room understood what had just happened. But for Judge Allen and Marcus Hayes, time had stopped. In front of her stood not just a defendant, not just a man accused of armed robbery and assault. No, this was Marcus Hayes, her childhood best friend, the boy who had walked her home from school every day, the boy who once gave her his coat during a thunderstorm because she was shivering, the one who taught her how to ride a bike, who used to draw superhero comics and dream of moving to the city to make something of himself. 25 years had passed since they last saw each other, and now fate had brought them together in the most unexpected, heartbreaking way. She sat back slowly, struggling to maintain her composure. She had a courtroom to run, a case to hear, a job to do. But inside, her thoughts were racing. What happened to you, Marcus? How did you end up here? Why now? Why in my courtroom? The court clerk broke the silence. "Your Honor, this is case number 279, State versus Marcus Hayes. Charges, armed robbery. Assault with a deadly weapon. Suspect was apprehended near the scene. Trial scheduled for preliminary hearing today." The prosecutor stood up and began reading the details, but Judge Allen could barely hear him. Her heart was pounding. Her ears rang with memories, with echoes of laughter from their childhood, with the sound of Marcus's voice calling her Becky, the nickname only he ever used. She had spent her entire life trying to make a difference through justice. But what do you do when justice sits on one side of the bench and a piece of your past stands on the other? She straightened herself, trying to keep her voice steady. "Proceed," she said, almost mechanically. But inside, everything had changed. The judge had recognized the man on trial, and what happened next would shock everyone. Judge Rebecca Allen tried to keep her face emotionless, her voice steady, but inside her mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far from the tense courtroom she ruled. Somewhere warm, innocent, and lost in time. Marlow, her hometown, a quiet blue-collar neighborhood where kids played in the street until the streetlights flickered on, where every house had a porch, every neighbor had a story, and where one friendship meant everything to a lonely girl with big dreams. Marcus Hayes wasn't just any friend. He had been her anchor, her protector, her childhood partner in crime. Back then, Rebecca was the quiet bookworm with thick glasses, always lost in a novel and always picked last for dodgeball. Marcus was the boy who noticed, the one who stood up for her when others mocked her, the one who believed in her when even she didn't. She remembered one afternoon in 7th grade. A group of boys had knocked her books into the mud just outside school. She stood frozen, humiliated, near tears. But before she could bend down to pick them up, Marcus had already done it for her. He handed them back without a word, and then, just loud enough for the bullies to hear, said, "She's gonna be somebody someday, smarter than all of you put together." He was right. But what had happened to him? Her thoughts raced. After high school, Rebecca had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university out of state. She'd left Marlowe determined to change her life, and maybe even the world. Marcus had stayed behind. He didn't have the grades or the family support, or maybe even the belief that he could leave. They had promised to keep in touch, promised to call, to write, to visit. But life got busy. Years passed. The calls stopped, the letters faded, and slowly, painfully, Marcus Hayes became a memory. Until now, Rebecca had climbed the ladder of success, college, law school, internships, and finally a seat on the bench. She had faced gang members, drug traffickers, corrupt officials. But nothing could have prepared her for this, for the moment when her past would walk straight into her courtroom in handcuffs. Her eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, who now sat quietly beside his public defender, staring at the table in front of him. His hands were clasped together, the cuffs now gone but the weight still visible. His hair was shorter than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his face older, more tired, but she could still see the boy in him, the one who once made her laugh until she snorted orange soda through her nose, the one who dared her to sneak into the abandoned treehouse behind Mrs. Whitley's bakery. The boy who said she was the smartest person he knew. Was he still in there? Or had life turned him into someone else? The prosecutor's voice droned on, laying out the charges. Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, a convenience store had been hit late at night, a clerk injured. The suspect, Marcus, was caught running from the scene. There was surveillance footage, witnesses, the case was strong, but something didn't feel right. Judge Allen knew Marcus, at least she thought she had. The Marcus she remembered had a big heart and an even bigger sense of justice. He hated bullies. He helped stray animals. He once got detention for standing up to a teacher who embarrassed a classmate. Could that boy really have become this man? Her heart wrestled with her mind. As a judge, she was trained to look at the facts, evidence, testimonies, not emotions, not memories, not guilt. And yet, the guilt was there, heavy. Maybe if I hadn't lost touch, she thought. Maybe if I had reached out, helped him, guided him, maybe then he wouldn't be here today. Not like this. A sudden wave of emotion rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down, steel in her spine. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not here, not now. She glanced again at Marcus, who now looked up, and for just a second their eyes met. In that brief moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them, and then the moment was gone. The trial was just beginning, but their story had started long before today, and it was far from over. The trial had officially begun, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was anything but ordinary. Judge Rebecca Allen sat composed behind the bench, but her thoughts were anything but calm. Every time Marcus spoke or even moved, her memory filled with echoes of their childhood. It was a surreal conflict of worlds, the rules and order of justice battling against the raw ache of personal history. The prosecutor, a sharp young attorney named Stephen Klein, stood and delivered the opening remarks with the cold efficiency of a man convinced he was right. He painted Marcus as a repeat offender, a man with a criminal record, someone who had already made his choices long ago and made them badly. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "this is not a case of mistaken identity." The defendant, Marcus Hayes, was seen fleeing the crime scene. He was found with a torn glove similar to the one seen on the perpetrator in the footage. His past speaks for itself. Several petty thefts, drug possession charges. This isn't a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a man who's been walking the wrong path for years. Rebecca listened carefully, her expression unreadable, but her inner voice was screaming, "What happened to you, Marcus?" Then the defense attorney stood, a tired, overworked public defender named Mr. Lawson. He shuffled his papers and adjusted his tie nervously. "Your Honor," he began, his voice softer, "we don't deny that Mr. Hayes was at the scene, but presence is not proof. My client did not commit this robbery. In fact, we believe that he was trying to de-escalate the situation. The prosecution wants to sell a narrative based on assumptions and past mistakes, but we urge the court to consider the full picture. Then Marcus himself stood. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor," he said, locking eyes with Rebecca, "I know what this looks like. But I didn't rob that store. I was outside. My friend ran in, said he needed money, said he was just going to scare the clerk. I followed him in, trying to stop him, but then it all happened so fast." He paused. "I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't steal anything. I swear it." The courtroom was silent. Judge Allen leaned forward. Her job required her to be impartial, but this wasn't just another defendant. This was someone who once shared dreams with her, someone who once swore they'd both escape the traps of their neighborhood. Still, facts mattered. And so far, the facts weren't looking good for Marcus. There was a shaky eyewitness account from a teenage bystander who swore Marcus had something in his hand. The clerk was still in the hospital, recovering from a head injury, and couldn't testify yet. The surveillance footage showed two men entering the store, but the second figure, the one who actually brandished the weapon, had his face partially covered. But the damage had already been done, and Marcus had a record. That record haunted him now. Rebecca knew how the system worked. People like Marcus didn't get many second chances. The court didn't always care about the truth. It cared about evidence, about precedent, about efficiency, and most of all, about consistency. Still, something didn't sit right. She'd seen liars before, hundreds of them. People who'd spin a tale to escape punishment. But Marcus? His eyes didn't have the wild defiance of a guilty man. They had something different, something rare, regret, pain, maybe even truth. She reminded herself she couldn't let emotion cloud judgment. But how do you erase a lifetime of knowing someone? How do you pretend the person in front of you is just a stranger with a file? Rebecca took a deep breath. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice measured. "Until we've heard all evidence, I must ask you not to testify without counsel. You'll have your opportunity. Please be seated." Marcus nodded and sat down. And with that, the trial moved forward. Documents presented, testimonies called, exhibits examined. But deep in her heart, Judge Allen knew this case was different. Not just because of who Marcus was, but because of what was at stake: the truth, the past, and a second chance if he deserved it. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for justice. It had become a battleground between what the world saw Marcus as and what Judge Allen remembered him to be. 3 days into the trial, tension hung in the courtroom like a thick fog. The testimonies were done. The evidence had been reviewed. The prosecution had made a convincing case, enough that even some spectators began to whisper about Marcus's fate being sealed. The press was circling, too, fascinated by the strange twist of fate. A judge presiding over the trial of her childhood friend. It was a story made for headlines. Judge Rebecca Allen did her best to keep her emotions in check. On the outside, she was the picture of professionalism, calm, firm, and fair. But inside, every day in court chipped away at the wall she had tried to rebuild after recognizing Marcus. Then, on the morning of what was expected to be closing arguments, something happened, something that changed everything. It began with a quiet knock on her chamber's door before the session started. Rebecca, still going over her notes, looked up to find a court officer with an envelope in his hand. "This came in first thing this morning, Judge. Marked urgent. Anonymous drop-off." She frowned, took the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a note. Just 4 words, written in shaky handwriting. "You need to see this." Her heart pounded as she plugged the drive into her computer. A video file popped up, labeled simply Cam 4, August 22. She hit play. The footage was grainy, taken from what looked like a back-alley security camera. But what it showed left her breathless. 2 men stood outside the convenience store, one clearly Marcus, the other taller, hooded, more agitated. The taller man, later identified as Devontae Cole, a known local gang member, was pacing, waving something in his hand, a pistol. Marcus stood in front of him, palms up, clearly trying to talk him down. The video had no sound, but Marcus's body language was unmistakable. He pointed toward the store, then shook his head. He grabbed Devante's arm, trying to stop him, but Devante shoved him off and stormed inside. Moments later, Marcus followed, hesitantly. The video ended just as they entered the store, but it was enough. Enough to cast a massive shadow over the entire prosecution narrative. Enough to show that Marcus hadn't been the instigator. He had tried to stop it. "I need you to bring Mr. Lawson and Mr. Klein to my chambers. Now." Minutes later, both attorneys were standing across from her, confused. "New evidence has just come in," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes sharp. "It appears to be security footage from a nearby location, one that was not part of the original case file." She showed them the video. Klein's jaw clenched. Lawson's eyes widened. This could change the entire case," Lawson whispered. "It does," Rebecca replied quietly. Back in the courtroom, Judge Allen called for a recess and summoned both legal teams for a private conference. She explained the contents of the video, and after brief deliberation, both parties agreed. The footage needed to be entered into the official record. When court resumed, the video was played for all to see. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Marcus sat in silence, eyes wide with disbelief, like he didn't even dare hope. The prosecutor stood slowly, adjusting his tie. For the first time during the trial, his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, the state believes further investigation is warranted. At this time, we move to pause proceedings and consider a withdrawal of charges pending verification." The room fell silent again. Judge Allen took a breath. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked out at the courtroom. "This court acknowledges the new footage and accepts the motion to adjourn. All parties will reconvene within 72 hours for final review." Her gavel came down. Bang. In one moment, the trial's direction had changed completely, from what seemed like a certain conviction to a possible exoneration. But questions still lingered. Who had submitted the footage? Why now? And what did this mean for Marcus's future? No one had expected this turn. Not the jury, not the attorneys, not even the judge. But the biggest shock was still to come. The courtroom was packed again, more than ever before. Word had spread about the mysterious video that had thrown the entire trial into question. People came in curious, skeptical, hopeful. But none of them were more anxious than Marcus Hayes, who sat in silence, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the front of the room. And at the front sat Judge Rebecca Allen, her face calm, but her soul in turmoil. It had been 72 hours since the video had surfaced. 3 days of intensive investigation, 3 days of late-night calls, security verification, and witness tracking. The police had confirmed it. The footage was real. The camera was installed by a nearby business as part of a new pilot program for neighborhood security. It had simply been overlooked during the initial sweep. And the man in the video, the one holding the gun, the real aggressor, was now officially identified as Devante Cole, who had fled town the night after the robbery. A warrant had been issued for his arrest. All signs pointed to one truth: Marcus wasn't guilty. But exoneration in court isn't always as swift or satisfying as it should be. For Judge Allen, this wasn't just about justice. It was about history, memory, responsibility. She had asked herself every night for 3 days, had she failed Marcus years ago? Could she have done something to help? Reached out? Shown up for him before the world tried to crush him? Now, as the final session began, everyone held their breath. The prosecutor stood first. "Your Honor," he said, "in light of new and compelling evidence, and with full cooperation from the defense, the state hereby moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Marcus Hayes." A gasp spread through the room. Marcus looked up slowly, not quite believing it. Then, for the first time in the entire trial, Judge Allen spoke from the heart. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice unwavering but soft, "this courtroom has heard conflicting stories, from witnesses, from attorneys, from circumstance. But evidence doesn't lie, and sometimes the truth shows up late, but it still shows up." She paused, eyes locking with his. "There was a time when I knew you better than anyone, A time when we both believed we could rise above the world around us. And now, I believe that boy is still inside you, maybe a little older, a little bruised, but not broken. Her voice dropped to a whisper only the front rows could hear. You were right. You didn't belong here, not in handcuffs, not on trial. I'm sorry the system failed to see it sooner. She raised her gavel. Case dismissed. Bang, it was done. But it wasn't over. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with stunned silence, as if no one could believe what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, people stood. A few clapped, a few cried. Marcus didn't move at first. Then he stood, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. He simply looked at Rebecca, eyes filled with something deeper than words. Thank you. Outside, as the crowd poured into the sunlight, reporters swarmed. But Marcus kept walking, straight toward the steps where Rebecca had exited moments before. They stood across from each other. He spoke first. You didn't have to say what you said in there. She smiled softly. Yes, I did. I thought you forgot about me. I never did. A long pause. Then Marcus said, I don't know what happens next. I've still got a lot to fix. Rebecca nodded. Then start now. Don't waste the second chance you just got. He held out his hand. She took it, and in that moment, two lives that had drifted apart were pulled back into alignment, no longer as judge and defendant, but as old friends who had somehow found their way back. Not every trial ends in justice. Not every story gets a second chance, but this one did. And what happened next didn't just shock everyone, it restored hope.